Hey, welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Ankur Patel, and today I have a very special guest here with me, Stephen Taylor, who's the CIO at Vast Bank.
Thank you, Ankar. I really appreciate it. I appreciate the opportunity to share our insights and to talk to you about AI.
So, to kick off the show, would love to learn a little bit more about Vast Bank and your position there, just so our audience has a little bit more context.
Yeah, so Vast Bank is a bank. It's based in Tulsa, Oklahoma. It's a regional bank. We've been serving the Tulsa community and the surrounding areas for over 40 years. As the CIO at Vast Bank over the last 5 years, helped lead us implement a couple different technology pieces, including some of the AI pieces we'll talk about today. We've had a couple different new industry experiences that we'll talk about today, but also we'll cover some of those specific pieces. And my role as CIO is both in leading the technology department and the staff, but also leading the business side implementation of a lot of those new business lines.
Thanks for that overview. And we love speaking to individuals like yourself because we do a lot of work in regulated industries. Banking in particular is so complex. It's so important to our financial lives. There's mission critical work that's being done, but there are always huge opportunities to go and make things more efficient. And based on your background, you have insight into the business side as well as the technology. So I think we'll be able to tie together some really important concepts. Why don't we start with a couple of the topics and terms that you've coined, for your business, starting with decision AI, right? Something that you've used in the past, something that is near and dear to how you talk about capabilities that Gen AI is able to deliver. Could you help define a little bit about what decision AI is all about?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I'm going to take a little bit of a trip down memory lane. My undergraduate, when I went to Oklahoma State University and dating myself a little bit from 90 to 95. And whenever I was at Oklahoma State, I actually took classes in artificial intelligence. And that's where I really got my introduction to AI. And so AI has been around, the market for quite an extended period of time. And so at that particular time, it was really around decision engines and decisioning. But the technology and the approaches really didn't exist to support the automated decisioning process really until just the last 10 years, and really in the mainstream the last 5 years with Gen AI. So that the generative AI term has become so strong and almost ubiquitous and synonymous with AI. It's really not. AI is this huge multidiscipline field that has impacts to a lot of different areas. But decision AI is the first time we've actually started to see things become material to where we can support real business activity done and performed by AI in a more material way. Before, it was you used AI or machine learning algorithms to do certain aspects, but then you had to use programming wrapped with it. So this
Mhm.
idea of actually having AI get to the point of facilitating a real decision, it is really just in the last couple years. So one of the things that I saw early on, so I did some of my master's studies at MIT, and one of the pieces that really got to see there was some of the things that led to a lot of where we're at now. And so it's real, the idea of being able to say, okay, I take this information and in real time, can mathematically determine an outcome is just one piece of that idea of making a decision. So decision making and decision engines, again, have always been based on heuristic rules. So taking those from heuristic rules to where AI is performing decision activities in the company, that's a big leap that has just recently started to become possible.
I love that. I think that's right. It's a huge inflection point because I think prior to Gen AI, AI was more, it was very narrow in what it could solve for, and it had to be built very narrowly too, mostly with labeled data. I think with Gen AI, you can work a lot. You need a lot less data first to align the model, and then you can do more of the understanding and reasoning that's so much in the domain of people, of humans. For the first time, technology is now able to do that, so it's able to understand us a bit more and therefore solve more open context problems that require human level understanding and reasoning, which we had to, as you rightfully said, we had to use rules to do before. Now we can actually turn over some of that to a model to be able to go through. Again, grounded with enough context to kind of do that well, but then it's able to do that So it kind of delves a little bit more into the realm of what used to be solely human activity, it seems like.
Yeah, so I'll give you a specific example, a non-vast example, right? So my one of my previous employers was Devon Energy, an oil and gas company based in Oklahoma City, and one of the things that we did there was using AI or machine learning algorithms to help steer a drilling rig so that you could drill wells without having it manned. And the reason was, having people on site, um, that puts those people at risk, right? It's a dangerous occupation. And so the more you can remove people from that loop, then you're taking people out of harm's way, which is a great objective. And part of the interesting piece is you could read the instruments, right? You could create sensors and other pieces, read those in, and you could use machine learning to model it to see what a setting should be and adjust it. But to actually make the decision on what to do next, you still had to have a person partially in the loop, and then they would have to take those actions, and then using other software and other things adjust it. So that being able to close that full loop where it can take data in, process it, and apply the learning piece, and actually have a decision making framework to understand the context to generate that outcome, is taking that knowledge management gap and just based on the English language translate that into something real is something that's revolutionary.
Yeah, agreed. Absolutely agree. So could you talk a little bit about how you've been able to get buy-in, maybe adoption, maybe you're in the early stages of doing discovery still, but how you've been able to kind of work with all of this new technology that's come online on the Gen AI side to do things like decision AI at Fast?
Yeah, so I think first of all, I think it's best not to talk about the technology in most cases with the business leaders. And most of the time, it's kind of the best way I've seen that it works is talk about the problem that's being solved and the value of solving the problem. And one of the things that's especially in the financial services industry and at Vast Bank and banking is there really isn't a depth of technical talent at most financial institutions and banking, and that's because it's so regulated and so heavily regulated. And there's not a real understanding of technology, and frankly, there doesn't need to be anyway. But what usually ends up happening in banking, and I've talked to a lot of my peers, and they experience the same
Mhm.
conversation point, is that most of the people who are involved in banking use people power to deal with scale. And so when you have, I'm just going to talk for a second about integration and orchestration, right? So you
Mhm.
have most banks will have somewhere between at least 1.5, if not 2 to 3 times as many software applications and titles as they have people. That just doesn't make sense, right? So, and the reason is that there is some complexity to what happens, and so they just buy another third party off the shelf piece of software, and now you have another data silo that's not integrated and not organized, and you have to integrate this process. Well, what do? You hire people to swivel chair, right? They take data from one system and put it in another system, and they don't really have the people to do that integration work, right? That's people with the technical skills to do data management and data integration. And so the challenge is then you start to do that with more and more people and more people, and all of a sudden you get a flood of new customers. Like a recent business event that happened recently was the Main Street lending program, and banks are trying to figure out, like, how do I respond to this flood of loans that are coming into the bank? How do I deal with that? Well, I hire a whole bunch more people, right? I hire a bunch more temp people to do more work. And so it really gets down to one of the core conversations in banking is efficiency ratios. Like, how do you become more efficient? Well, you don't, because you're hiring people to do work, right? That's the way you scale, is scale with people, and it just doesn't work. And so what they try to do is they try to shift to less loans that are bigger loans, right?
Yeah.
I'd rather do $1 million loan than $1,000 loans, because it requires
Mhm.
less people, right? And that's because your processes aren't integrated. There's no orchestration across those applications. And to me, Gen AI is the perfect way to solve this particular problem. So when you go in and talk about, applying decision AI or Gen AI in this space, you talk about, hey, we're going to help apply a new technology, forget about the technical pieces of it, that is going to help you address your efficiency ratios, and it's going to help you address your scalability problems, and we're going to help automate that. And by the way, we're also in the process going to make it your systems integrations more fair and more consistent, and better, higher quality as part of the process. And you'll find that that you're in addition to being faster, more expensive, you'll give better customer service too.
Yeah, it's incredible the value impact that is possible when you at least replace the tasks that Gen AI is able to tackle, and kind of move it off to the models and let like the people really deal with the edge cases. Because frankly, it's hard to hire really great people. It takes a lot of effort to even source them, to find them, to then train them, and then retaining them is also a challenge. I mean, we saw this in the last couple of years where there's just a shortage of really great talent to hire. And what Gen AI is able to do is it's able to reduce the need to have quite as many people involved in the process, because it's able to go and triage some of the activity to the point where the people that are involved are doing more of the edge cases, more of the complex cases. Maybe they're doing the final review. And so there's this really great symbiotic relationship between AI on one hand doing
Yeah.
the initial legwork, and then almost as like a junior analyst or a junior member of the team, and the people that are in those roles are doing more of the complex, more senior level activity that's involved, and that helps with the efficiency side and the operating margins. But I think it also has a huge impact on the people, because they want to be doing less grunt work. They want to do the more important, more challenging, intellectually stimulating work. And of course, like, we can't forget about the customer. The customer wants to see their application turned around faster,
Yeah.
so they could actually make an informed decision. So ultimately, it does end up being revenue impacting for the business, because they're able to capture, let's say they're able to issue more loans and process more loans and win on more loans. So I think there's just huge, massive gains. Stephen, one of the things that I do hear a lot, though, is that a lot of business professionals, they're just learning about Gen AI. There's a lot of information, there's a lot of noise. It feels very daunting. And even though they know that this is a journey that they should get on, it's hard for them to figure out, where should they start in the business, which vendors should they consider and do POCs with, what do they do with their internal team. There's just almost like this information paralysis that's happening. I'm curious how you've been able to kind of see that navigated with what you do.
Well, and I think part of it was just good executive communications to help keep people informed, right, and good general information. There's also a danger. So the place that most people see Gen AI is in their experience with Chat GPT, and in a lot of cases it's with their kids trying to use Chat GPT to do their homework for them and other things like that, right? That's how they get initial exposure. Or somebody's playing and seeing who can come up with the best joke, with their kids, and that's kind of how they're initially exposed to it. My brother, who runs a drilling company, actually did that very thing. He was like, "Oh yeah, I know Chat GPT. That's what we used at the party to come up with jokes." And I just thought that was so funny, that his exposure to my field was, just in kind of a informal playing around. But to translate that for them in their mind from this, exploratory plaything, there's just some people who don't have that kind of personal curiosity to dig in, and taking that to a professional application, especially in financial industries that is generally risk adverse, right? And anything that comes out that's new without it being well understood, is actually, to me, appropriate, that kind of response. And so being able to create forums to show people, demonstrate it, but also show the negative sides. I think what's missing right now is that leadership level voice, where people have good education to inform their people. Because what is the natural gut reaction in a risk, intolerant world, is just block it all, right? Turn it all
Mm-hmm.
off, make it not available. And we saw how well that works with other things, right? It doesn't, right? People find a way around it if they find it interesting and compelling. And I think the other piece is, a lot of it is still very much technical toolkit oriented. And you
Mhm.
have things that are very technical toolkit oriented, and you have people who don't have a technical base to build from. You really need something that's going to help bridge the gap between the technical toolkit and a real world problem. And so the the focus that we had not was not on the technology. We demonstrated the technology afterwards, but the real focus was on the business problem. Because if you can talk about solving a business problem and you can show them and demonstrate solving the business problem, they're much more interested in applying that technology generically once they figured out how to solve the particular business problem. So specific example for us is one of the pieces that we ran into in a very frequent, the two that I'll use. One is doing contract reviews, right? We need to review contracts all the time as part of our third party risk management, and every bank is
Mhm.
involved in third party risk management, does a ton of contract reviews. So being able to have a way that can read, interpret, summarize, and aggregate, pull out the legalese language and give you kind of layman's term language is very valuable in speeding up that process, but also to come through and recommend and say, here's my standard set of criteria. Look at this, tell me where the contract falls short, and give me the specific action items I need to go back to the vendor on, and it can generate those and help you in that flow. That's a huge value add to different leaders that are involved in contract review. Another example that I'll use is, um, most firms are audited and examined by their primary regulator, an external auditor or examiner, an internal audit and examiner,
Mhm.
and typically some type of internal control matrix. And so most of those happen either every quarter, every 6 months, every year, every 18 months, depending on your regulatory framework and risk posture. But an example is you're generating the same documents and the same questions over and over and over and over, and you hire a large number of people to deal with those. And as you mature your control framework, you increase the amount of manual documents that you produce over and over and over. So, to me, by being able to show that we could take one of the more manpower intensive items, generate that for a recommendation for one of our stakeholders to reduce the amount of manpower. It's not just manpower. To your point, the thing that we saw is nobody really wanted to do any of that work anyway, right?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
it's repetitive, it's mundane, it's very low level, but some of it requires very high level decision making, and
Mhm.
so it just becomes a heavy weight on your organization. But in order to remain compliant and honestly to address things in a way that really addresses the core of what the regulators need, you need to do that work anyway. And so being able to balance that out is important. And so using Gen AI to help generate those documents as template that can be reviewed. You still want to. I still believe you want to keep a human in the loop for any of those pieces that you submit. For regulatory purposes, but being able to generate that and save a lot of that routine mundane effort is a huge value add, and that gets people on board pretty quick.
I mean, there's so many incredible things that you just mentioned. I think selling to the business, speaking about the business problems and the business solutions, right? So it's less about the technology, at least with some of the very executive level conversations. Because technology is important, but it gets in the way of some of the quality of conversations that you need to have around identifying what a current state and what a future state looks like, to really motivate time, interest, and resources being deployed. And then I think what you stated is absolutely right. I think most of the Gen AI talk that happens publicly in the mainstream world is on, I would say it's like maybe trivial applications, trivial in the sense that it's like designing jokes or maybe writing an essay. Not that these aren't important, but it doesn't have the same impact as like Gen AI applications in banking or insurance or healthcare, where like the stakes are just much higher. You have to take into account the compliance and regulatory environment, and so risk aversion is, I think,
Yeah.
is the right move. Um, and then I think where you can really deliver value is you figure out where can the Gen AI portion fit in, so that it's doing the portion that it's actually very able to, while still leaving enough agency for the people the humans in the loop essentially to review later downstream before final action is taken that might impact individual or businesses in a material manner. And I think those are the types of conversations that I think are happening. Is like, where does Gen AI fit in? How does it fit in? And I think if you land it well, it's huge, massive value adds. It's almost like the promised land is definitely worth the arduous effort to get to, because the companies that have gotten there, at least with a certain number of applications, they've done very, very well. Right? It's not hype. It's really reality, but it's just an arduous journey to get there. As you think about the different applications that you're building, how many of them are you building internally homegrown versus looking at software vendors or external partners like consulting firms and others to go and navigate this journey?
Yeah, I mean, I would say we have some. I would say we staff internally for expertise. So our senior level staff is internal, and the heavy lifting is with either third party software solutions or with third party agencies. And in banking, there's a regulatory aversion to software development, and so really the regulatory framework doesn't really that discourages internal software development. And so, making it where you're either consuming it from a third party or you're partnering with a third party who's going to generate that for you and, sell that back to you as a service. Those are the models that generally work in financial services and banking. So it's not conducive to building a big internal tech team. The industry is not. And actually, I think in environments where there's a high rapid pace of change, then I would encourage that in any industry, not just ones because it's
Mm.
regulatorily scrutinized. But this industry is changing very, very quickly, and you need people who can are professionally navigating that. Folks like multimodal, right? It would be a great type of organization to partner with to help lead you through that journey, but also to provide a lot of the heavy lifting for learnings. And if you can turn it into a product to, reduce the risk and to spread that risk over multiple customers, there's just too much heavy investment for an industry that is already based on a thinner spread margin. It's more important to me about solving the problem. And so I think maybe a way to kind of recap the last couple parts of the conversation, when you're trying to get as a leader and or as a technologist to get buy-in, I think the three kind of key things to think about, are number one, really understand the problem and understand the problem domains in your business and which ones are applicable. Number two, really understanding how you're going to solve the problem and position all your communications in vein of the solution, right? So do the solutioning after you really understand the problem that you're trying to solve. And then number three is partner with strong partners who can help do a lot of that heavy lifting, who are deep expertise in those pieces, both in the business side of the problem and in the technical side. So, be clear on what your problem is that you're trying to solve in business terms, understand the value proposition and the solution in business terms, and then partner with the technologists who can help you be effective in implementing that.
I love that, Stephen. That's an incredible recap. So let's talk a little bit maybe about the downsides or potential shortcomings as well, because I know there's tremendous opportunity, and we rightfully have spent a good bit of time on that. But I'm curious, what are the potential limitations or drawbacks of relying on decision AI for risk management and other use cases within the bank, and how can banks effectively address these concerns?
Yeah, I'll just start with the couple that I think are important. The first and foremost is in order to do a lot of these higher value business cases, we talked a little bit earlier about kind of integration and orchestration, and maybe I'll kind of build on that a little bit. And when you look at different applications that need integrated, a lot of those applications, especially in banking and financial services, you need, number one, you need access to the data and preferably in real time if possible. And number two, you're going to need to have a way to initiate action inside of those applications. And number three, you're going to need some kind of orchestration that's going to facilitate a business process that is a higher level business process execution. So the challenge is then, if that's kind of the overall context for the solutioning, the first thing that you run into is a lot of these applications are very old legacy applications. You don't have access to the data or the database. Sometimes it's hosted as a SaaS service. Sometimes it's just 30 years old, and it's an old COBOL program that's running on a mainframe that has access to a bunch of files, or it's in EBCDIC or whatever that
Mhm.
that modern technologies and tools struggle with integrating with. So the lack of ability to integrate with some of those applications is crucial. And sometimes they'll have an API, but it's an old SOAP API, not a REST API, so you have to adapt all of your tools. So really understanding where your data is and how to get access to your data, what your applications are, how to integrate with them, and which ones have a robust enough and dependable enough AI to actually take some of those actions. To get to that kind of decision making generative AI, you have to have that technical framework there. So those are some of the challenges kind of on the business side. The second is um, that I would say is just as big of an issue is, and but perhaps even more, is a lot of financial services, banks, credit unions have outsourced their software and their IT technology pieces so much to third parties that they no longer have the internal business process expertise.
Mhm.
So you'll run into times where you say, well, I understand that you go to this screen and you click on these five buttons and it takes you to this next screen that you click on these, and then that's kind of your flow. But help me understand what the core data elements are that you really need in that flow. And
Yeah.
they don't know,
Yeah.
right? They've never had that line of questioning before. Or tell me what, draw out on let's do a workflow or a swim lane and let's draw out the business process. And they've never done that before, right? Because generally, if they needed something new done, they just buy a new off the shelf third party application. So
Yeah.
and they know how to use the application, but they don't really know what the application does under the covers, have no idea, right? So there's a lot of that expertise in business process, and the expertise is locked up in the third party vendors. And then the I would say the third one are some of the technical limitations of the toolkit in Gen AI, and that's dealing with hallucinations and dealing with you know um, artificial decisions that are made there based on knowledge sets, dealing with this is executed externally and I have to move my data out to the some third party cloud that I don't trust, like all those other things that we talk about all the time in the AI
Sure.
community, right? um,
Yeah.
so I'd say those three key ones are understanding your applications and how to integrate with them, understanding the data sets that you need and how to get to them, understanding and having business partners that really understand their business workflows well, and then just the technical infrastructure challenges associated with AI technology. Those are kind of the four big, I would say, challenges that everybody should expect to run into, especially in financial services.
Yeah, and those are really, really material challenges, and I think it kind of really highlights the complexity of the organization that's been built up over, in some
Yeah.
cases, decades. Lots of different point solutions that have been assembled, some homegrown, some third-party vendors, and of course, because of employee turnover over time, some of that institutional knowledge is lost. And I think you do have the opportunity to go and revisit the way things are orchestrated. I think process review, workflow review with the capabilities that Gen AI is able to deliver, it's a great opportunity, I think, for many organizations to kind of go and look at their entire slate of orchestration and kind of try to figure out ways to go and make it more efficient and not taking anything as a true given. But it's still innovation from within, because you do not want to gut and replace, do some massive digital transformation for things that are working well or well enough, right? But it's like you need to find the areas that you can go and introduce more efficiency and then start tackling them while without just sort of breaking the mold, which I think is super critical. So I think those insights are really amazing, Stephen. I think touching on another major point, though, is um, hallucinations, right? And we talk a lot about this, which is in non-mission critical industries or workflows, hallucinations, I mean, it's a nuisance, but it doesn't lead to dire consequences. Whereas in a lot of banking workflows, it potentially could. And so, how have you been able to navigate and align the model so it doesn't hallucinate, or at least that you're able to catch the hallucination so it doesn't affect downstream services?
Yeah, I think this is partially the solution that I've found. I'm not saying it's the right one, but the solution that I've found is simply don't try to do one task. Don't try to do an entire business process workflow with one prompt or one activity. So I find most hallucinations come into the process whenever people are trying to do too much at once. So
Hmm.
break things down. Your example that or the thing that you mentioned earlier, which is really taking and doing process modeling, I think is a key way to solve this. So instead of saying I'm just going to pick one from my industry, right? Taking customer origination and trying to solve customer origination, bad idea, right? Take customer origination and breaking it down that process into its discrete 128 tasks is what I have it about at right now, and breaking each one of those down and using Gen AI to solve one specific task. The
Hmm.
hallucination drops dramatically when you can do that. So if you can break them down into very discrete components and then orchestrate, just like with other integration activities, really orchestrate the sequencing of those. And another thing that I found is different tools are better for different specific subparts of that task model,
Hmm.
right? Um, we could talk about them for a while, but I've found that Falcon is really good at specific data oriented decision making, really lightweight, really fast. Llama 3 is actually one that I found has been really, really good about generating like Word document kind of structural pieces, and different tools at different tasks are appropriate, and really learning which one to use when is important. But the hallucination problem typically, again, can be solved by taking your example and breaking down a process, breaking it down into really discrete elements that are really well defined, and then applying the technology just in a discrete area. It seems to solve the majority of the problems.
Yeah, I love that idea. It's you could have a really well designed flow of different prompts to go and break down a bigger workflow into smaller discrete tasks, and so the chances of hallucination on any one task is a lot lower, particularly if you ground it with in a few shot learning. So you bring examples into the prompt that help align the model on that particular type of task. Even better if you have a model that's been fine tuned on that particular task, so it gets really good at delivering task level performance on that particular task. And so then you reduce the odds of hallucination. And I think also having a good barrier for the model to go in and say like when it doesn't know, right, and having some indication of that,
Yeah.
having some proxy. And I know that's hard because Gen AI doesn't have the traditional confidence scores that prior AI modeling AI models had. I think that is something that I think a lot of people, including multimodal, like what we do, we're trying to create good proxies for that. So we know when to transition this off to human in the loop versus when to actually have the model and then skip a step or two because it's so confident in that particular task. Um, and that
I
leads me
will,
to my next area,
I
which is
will
explainability.
if I
Sorry, go ahead, Stephen. I know you
Yeah,
have a point.
yeah. There's one other key thing that I left out there, and I think is important to mention. One of the other pieces is, if you really look at the AI RAG approaches that are out there right now, especially the retrieval augmented generation frameworks,
Mhm.
and there are a lot of different versions of it and a lot of different activities. But if you're using Gen AI and you're using it to generate the word pieces, make sure that you're getting the biggest issues in mission critical creation of content is making sure that the data is right. So it's one thing
Mhm.
to generate the words that have the right context and the right understanding. But if you have a question like how many customers do you have, right? You may have some word logic explaining that needs to be done just in identifying what a customer is versus what a customer isn't. There's some kind of contextual pieces, but the actual here's my list of customers and I need to count the number of rows, right? Building RAG to tie that in to get that answer and not having it dependent that's where people I think, get into hallucinations that are more solvable. Sorry, I forgot to leave that. I forgot to mention that. That's an important, I think, part to make sure
Yeah.
we address.
I think that's absolutely right. And part of that is also comes down to intelligent chunking of the data and making sure that the quality of the data that's stored for on which RAG is performed is there. And then providing just more context of the model when you're actually asking a question is has the full context that you need and the clarity that like what a customer is. I think it's super critical. I think people will rethink how they ask questions, just like when you speak to an Alexa or another like Siri or Google Home, you have to phrase it in a particular way to get it to respond
Yeah.
in kind in the way that you expect. I think asking large language models questions with the clarity that the large language model needs to get the right answer, I think people will discover better means to do that. So part of it is also a better awareness on the part of the human asking the model for the right answer. So there's some really good design I think design architectures that will come from this as well, which I'm pretty excited about. But let's talk a little bit about RAG and other Gen AI applications, particularly when it comes to explainability, which is non-technical audiences in these mission critical workflows in regulated industries will need to develop trust with the AI that they are using. Because unless that trust is there, they won't want to go and use it because they are fearful that they're going to violate some regulatory consideration or some compliance consideration, or frankly, they'll just have a bad financial outcome even if there's no regulatory impact. So, how have you been able to design explainability into the applications that you've built?
Yeah, so maybe if we just took another example in how they solve this problem, I think it is a good way for people to wrap their minds around. This is how I explain it to some of my team. If you go and you look at research papers and you see thousands of research papers that are all published out in all the research journals, the formal ones, right? How can I trust that the information that they're stating and the pieces that they're putting together and the conclusions, how can I trust that they've done the right research?
Mm-hmm.
You use citations. You have to explain where you got it from and how you got it,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I can't just go and say, here's how greenhouse gas emissions work. I have to write it, and then I say, here's all the other pieces that have already been scientifically vetted, frame it, and this is how I present a new context, but I show you the context. I think that same way is how you start to build in the trust. So you go and explain, this is where I got the data from, this is the system of record, for this system. My simple example of where are your customers. For us, it's our bank core. So your bank core system, the equivalent of an ERP, is where I keep track of all my customer records. Well, if I can go and say, in my quote, I ask it how many customers, and oh, by the way, this data came from the bank core on this particular date from this particular table by counting these particular rows, right? Then it gives a amount of credibility to that particular resource. So just think of research paper citation and building that into every artifact that's delivered. Quote your sources, I guess, is the way I think about it, whether
Yeah.
that source is data or something else.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. It's a citations piece. I mean, we have two querying products: conversational AI, which is an enterprise RAG application, and then database AI, which is querying structured databases using natural language. And for both, the answer is exactly what you're referring to. It's being able to cite how the model got to the particular answer. So, what context did it use? And that's on the RAG side. So, what documents and segments of that document that the model consider to get to the right answer. And then on the database side, it's actually showing which databases or which tables and which fields did it consider. And for a technical user that wants to go and really troubleshoot, we also have SQL statements that the model had to go through to get to the right answer. And so you develop this level of like being able to trace how the model thought through the different areas that you need to think through to come to the proper answer. And then in some cases, if the model doesn't have confidence, being able to force the model to say no, because no is the second best answer, right? If you don't know what the right answer is with confidence, best to say no, showcase like where you got stuck maybe so that someone can go and improve that model over time. But not to go in and give an improper answer or hallucinate, like as we were speaking to a couple of minutes ago, avoiding some of that. But the citations piece is critical. It's what we expect of people. We should expect the same for models to develop trust there.
Yeah, and one of the ways I've also found is that's true in dashboards and other things, right? Where you just go in. When we were building some of our first dashboards that had nothing to do with AI or Gen AI, people are like, I don't trust this. I go log into my core system and I get one answer, and then I log into this system and I get a different answer. And what we really, when we delve deep into it, and what we found was it's the issue, and you deal with this in Gen AI, it's the freshness of the data set. So if you're taking your data from your different source systems and you're feeding that into, a data lake, or whatever
Mhm.
that happens to be, a snowflake or something like that, and into landing tables, and then taking those landing tables and processing them into some tables, and then your Gen AI is pulling from those landing tables, but the data pipeline that you have takes, say, 2 days for the data to get from the transaction to getting it into that pipeline data set. You also need to be quoting that in your citation, right? The
Right.
here's how, quote, fresh or old the data is, right? This is how fresh or stale it is. And the way we did it was simply as saying, this is the last timestamp at the top of the output that tells you how long, when this data set was rendered and engineered, and so people can make better informed decisions.
Right. Yeah, I think that's right. It's a great principle from something that we've had for a long time, which are these dashboards, right? I think the same principles apply here. So let's turn to maybe the conversation to another important area, which is the people impact. Now, obviously, I think AI, Gen AI, has been viewed both optimistically and very fearfully. I'm curious, how has the adoption of decision AI and risk management impacted the roles and responsibilities of risk management professionals within your organization?
Well, I think so far it's all been augmented capabilities and step up capabilities, and so the potential is still significantly stronger. So we're freeing up people's time that lift things up to a higher level, right? And so I think the more we can do to make people's lives better, I think we're seeing people get back to, from an understaffed role to a staffed, appropriately staffed level of roles. So that's eliminating a lot of that mundane routine work that gives them a higher value and a higher sense of purpose. To me, is a wonderful benefit to all the people that are involved. As far as staff reductions, I think what I'm seeing is you need people who are still, even when you get fully automated decision AI, you need people in the oversight roles. So that's a new set of skills, right? Taking
Yes.
somebody from doing a task to overseeing something that's doing and automating a task is a higher level analyst kind of a skill set. Some people will make that transition, some people won't. And then, secondly, being able to have people who are going to go deep and do the analyst um, roles and help generate new versions of the Gen AI and mature it and improve it and kind of become that shepherd of that approach. You need those people in the business doing that business level work. And so I think it's, yes, it is going to eliminate jobs, but it's jobs that are low level routine, and that people really don't want to do anyway, right? There's an opportunity to upskill, educate, inform, and to get people into things that are higher value add, which ultimately is more fulfilling as people anyway. So I
Yeah.
really think that is in the long run is a great new series of jobs that are going to be created. Some people will choose to not make that transition, and some people won't. And
Yeah.
I encourage everybody to take the time to start to work with their team members, work with your human resources department to really figure out how to build a path for people to go through that. Give them challenges, and let people make the decision on whether they want to go that direction. But your organization needs to start taking those steps.
I love that intel. I mean, I think you're absolutely right. I think in a lot of these departments, particularly in industries like banking, the teams have been understaffed, right? So now it's just becoming more properly staffed because you have technology that's doing some of the heavy effort that's involved in making those actions happen. And then a lot of the displacement happens in a portion of the workforce that is, it's grunt work, it's low label work. It's frankly roles that people don't want to be doing. I think I often to kind of describe like how agriculture used to be before technology. It's like people were truly breaking their backs, waking up at sunrise, working till sundown to go and really just feed a population. Now, because of the innovation with all the technology that's out there, it's definitely affected the farming workforce, but it's been for the huge benefit of so many consumers, including people in those roles that were able to successfully upskill. I think that human oversight function is super critical. In fact, we did have an entire department at my last startup where the human oversight function was actually overseeing how well the models were performing and then identifying patterns of error and remedying them. So I think you'll start seeing a whole lot of those types of roles open up, which I think a lot of the people that would have otherwise been displaced will have the opportunity to grow into. And frankly, it will be more value add. I think it would actually be higher paying. And it's going to be more fulfilling for those individuals. So very excited to see how that plays out. Stephen, we're just right at the top of the hour. Really appreciate you being on the show. Where can people find you and more about Vast Bank? We'll make sure to include that in the show notes.
Yeah, so Vast Bank is just vast.bank. So it is a top level domain, so no .com or anything at the end. And there's lots of great information there. I'm on LinkedIn and other social media platforms as Curious Reason. So feel free to reach out and connect. I'd love to talk more about Gen AI with everybody in the market and about the impact on financial services. Ultimately, I think this technology will help mature processes in banks quickly and reduce the risk associated with banking and ultimately make banking safer and sounder and more mature without having to add people to do it. So I'm pretty excited about the potential impact.
Yeah, it's an amazing vision, Stephen. And I'm hoping we can get there. Thanks so much for being on the show. Would love to have you on the show again in the future.